Awesome. Alrighty, everybody. We will be getting started today. Welcome to the Real Bottom Line, what your website is costing you. I'm Erica Sense from WP Engine, and today's conversation is about looking at your digital operations through a new lens, not just what your website costs, but what it's costing you not to evolve. We'll explore the hidden costs live inside your infrastructure, how they impact innovation, and what the most forward-thinking teams are doing to build more predictable, scalable foundations. Just a couple of quick housekeeping. We are recording this and we will be sending it out after the webinar via email, so check your inboxes for the recording. Feel free to use the Zoom chat at any time. Our team will answer as many questions as we can get through during the call. If we do not get to something, we will happily send you a response afterwards. And then at the very end, there will be a really quick survey for your feedback at the end of the webinar that'll pop up that we'd love if you can fill out for us. So with that, joining me are two leaders today who know this challenge of websites and the cost of operations and cost of innovation and opportunity cost of not innovating inside and out. Here we have James Hall, Director of Partnerships and Sales at WP Engine. He is a leader who helps organizations modernize how they build and scale their digital experiences. And then we are pleased to welcome Ellis LeMay, Director of WordPress Operations at AmericanEagle.com, who works hands-on with clients every day to optimize performance, workflows, and long-term digital ROI. So with that, I will hand things over to you, James and Ellis.
Thank you very much, Erica. Ellis, good to be talking this one through with you. This is quite the meaty topic, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's great to be here this morning. Hey, everybody.
Yeah, good to be online and speaking to you all, and hopefully we can give you some useful insights and some good takeaways here. But as I say, like it's a big subject to break down, right? You think about it. What is the website costing you today?
Mhm.
And I think that's because there's so many ways that you can think about that, so many facets.
Yeah.
For some, they'll be thinking about this at the start of a new project.
Mhm.
They're on a CMS at the moment. Do they make that change? And they've got a whole raft of decisions that they're making thereafter. And I guess there are others that are maybe a little bit further down that track. They might be quite happy with the CMS they've got, and it's more about the day-to-day costs,
Mhm.
the how do they manage their infrastructure, self-host,
Right.
managed platform, that type of thing. And so a different set of questions to ask about that moment in time and thinking about frameworks, etc. But I guess
Mhm.
really for us today, a sensible flow probably is to start at that example of someone on a legacy platform. No doubt, Ellis,
Mhm.
that's a conversation you've had multiple times over the years. How do you help businesses tackle that kind of conversation where it's very much like a, hey, do we stick or do we twist? And when you think about it in the lens of opportunity and cost, how do you help them through that narrative?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's big. Definitely a big topic. So just for a little bit of background for our listeners, everyone joined in this morning. I've spent about the last 10 years at AmericanEagle.com talking to all kinds of different organizations and companies about essentially their website builds, and that can be everything from a marketing brochure site to really robust dynamic applications that, people are logging into, like portals to, do various tasks and things like that. And so I've seen a lot of different kinds of scenarios, and I've talked to a lot of organizations that, like you point out, James, are really on some legacy infrastructure, some legacy technology, and they're basically looking to modernize. And it's interesting because I think I kind of tend to break this topic down into sort of different layers, if you will, right? You've got, if we're talking within the context of web apps and websites, you've got your actual application, like let's suppose it's WordPress, but then you've got the infrastructure that it needs to run on. So I think of it kind of like the engine and then the fuel that runs the engine, right? And I think that there's different pathways we can explore this topic through, because speaking from the application development side, I've worked with a lot of organizations that they've got real factors. They've got tight timelines, or I should say urgent deadlines. They've got a lot of different features and functionality that they need to develop and build to tailor to their audiences, but also perhaps their internal stakeholders and their business requirements. And the way that you approach developing those things can very much be a sort of quick consumable style play, or it can be like a longer term, more thoughtful investment style play, right? Where it's just the classic, do you want something fast and cheap and in a hurry, so it kind of just gets the bare minimum job done? Or are you looking to build something that is much more foundationally integral so that it can stand the test of time and you can iterate on it over the long haul? Those are very different scenarios, obviously very different budgets. And then going right along with that as an equally important consideration is the infrastructure that runs it, because you have essentially the same set of decisions there. Are you looking for something that is just quick, cheap, or are you looking for something that is a much more like managed service, something that brings more capability to the table and allows you to scale those applications? So there's a lot. It's a very wide equation, and there's a lot to consider in there.
And I can imagine most people are saying, yes, all of that, please.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Yeah.
I like everything
Absolutely.
you said there.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but
And
it,
so, yeah, go ahead.
but also there's that thing of like saying, well, maybe we just stay with what we're doing. And how do you help them just decide actually there's an opportunity cost to that factor as well? If you just stay put.
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, so much. It's funny because when I got into very early in my career, when I got into implementing technology for companies, I thought it was just going to be every day immersed in code and playing with the technology. And there is, to be fair, a lot of that. But what there is also a lot of is people and processes and understanding how they work, right? And so to answer your question, James, of like how do we balance that? So much of modernizing systems has to do first with understanding what were the decisions that went into the original solution. Like, why is that legacy platform or solution working the way it is today? And it's fascinating because it's oftentimes a combination of factors. Sometimes you find out that long ago, 10, 15, sometimes even longer than that, many years ago, shortcut decisions were made then during the development of the initial inception of the application, and the organization just kind of adapted to it over time. And so you fast forward to a future point like 10 years later, and there's actually not a lot of institutional knowledge around like, how did we get here? And so you have to kind of work backwards a little bit. And then from there, it's really an exploration of how does the organization want to work? How can we build efficiencies? How can we basically give people time back in their day? So an example of this would be, I speak with a lot of IT professionals who have a lot of regular ongoing sort of maintenance style tasks to keep a lot of their hosting infrastructure healthy and running optimally. And they're doing a lot of, frankly, like busy work. They're taking manual backups, they're updating Ubuntu, things like that. They're trying to scale resources because they're watching traffic dashboards to see if their application is going to spike. And ultimately, this is stuff that can be better implemented to kind of be put on autopilot, but with some controls and parameters in there. And ultimately, when you get people time back in their day, they can do better work for their organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had one particular customer who was on a legacy system far longer than they wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And we were forcing them over a number of years. And it was just like, no, we can't do it because we just got to stick with what we got. It's too mission critical for us to try and think about moving. And eventually, when they did move, it was because they decided that the risk factor had switched, that actually it was too much risk to stay where they were. They were
Mm-hmm.
going to get left behind as a business. And this is one of the biggest organizations over here in the UK. Everyone would know who they are, and eventually they made that decision to said, look, we need to be able to move forward with the times. Like we need to take advantage of things like AI and all these types of things that we just can't do on a legacy system where there are fewer and fewer people who know how to operate this thing,
Mm-hmm.
and we're tied to those things. So that was why they moved ultimately, and that was one of
Right.
their when you think about the cost of a website, that was an opportunity cost for them. So let's
Yeah.
let's assume that. Sorry, carry on.
I was
Seriously.
going to say, an interesting aspect of that scenario you just spoke about is whomever that organization is. One, they're definitely not the only one out there in the world facing that exact same dilemma and objective. But it just kind of what's fascinating to me about that is at a time where they are ultimately wanting to accelerate into the future, they are first having to play catch up a little bit,
Yeah.
right? And that, and so that's a pattern that I think needs to kind of be broken a little bit, where, as technologists, if we're always kind of pushing on innovation and trying to get into the future of it, when we're realizing that we're already kind of behind the game, then that ultimately we're always going to be in that hamster wheel kind of playing catch up. So I don't know, I just kind of wanted to mention that because I think that just lends itself to consistent iteration. Like organizations should not wait for large swaths of time to go by before they decide to advance their tech stacks. I think doing it in small incremental steps, as time goes on, is probably the more fruitful way to approach it.
Yeah, and which is probably brings us on to like that first decision in terms of, right, you're gonna make a move.
Mm-hmm.
Um, are you gonna go proprietary, or are you gonna look at something like open source?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you help clients through that decision? Because that's something that you offer both parts of that equation at AmericanEagle.com. So how do you help them through that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We work with a lot of different platforms, a lot of licensed platforms like Sitefinity, Kenico, Sitecore. But then obviously we're on the open source side, we've got a phenomenal WordPress practice. We do a little bit of Drupal as well. And I think way back in the day, we might have done a Joomla site or two, but
Oh,
right. Yeah. Blast from the past. At any rate, yeah, these are fascinating topics because, one of the things I encounter in conversations with organizations when we're talking about what technologies should be used for their kind of future state and what we're going to build with. Whenever we're talking about WordPress and it comes up, a common topic that arises is people will say like, "Well, isn't WordPress insecure? How do we deal with that?" And I think that's a fascinating subject because obviously you can look at it one way where yes, it's open source, all the code's out there, anyone can download it and play with it for free. So in this big world we live in, you got bad actors, people up to no good. They can get their hands on the code and fiddle around with it and learn how to exploit it. But you also have this beautiful effect on the very opposite side of the spectrum where there are far more people who are not bad actors, who are looking to collaborate and contribute and grow the platform. And my observation throughout the last 10 years has been that when WordPress vulnerabilities are discovered, whether it be in core or it be in a plugin or a theme or something like that, the community just absolutely sprints to the solution. And oftentimes patches are released within hours or, a day or two. I've on the flip side of the coin, I've worked with also licensed platforms where vulnerabilities are disclosed, they're known, but there is a much slower pathway to a resolution because ultimately you're talking about an organization having to probably pull development resources off of primary product development pipelines to go and remediate vulnerabilities, and that's a tough business decision. So I think there's a lot of potential with open source in terms of lowering costs of ownership because you don't have these elongated timelines, and risks that do present themselves are ultimately mitigated by an entire community, not just a company.
I totally agree. And I think that we've seen people, particularly in the enterprise space, over the years, start to use WordPress for smaller projects and marketing teams saying like, hey, I need speed, I need agility to
Mm-hmm.
get this project to market. And they've got this big legacy system. And that's where we started to see the rise of WordPress used amongst the enterprise and the upper mid-market space. Um, but we've seen that now being more absorbed across larger and more critical workloads over the
Yeah.
years. Sometimes hybrid situations, headless situations, but in more say it's just a case of sort of secondary CMS and sort of integrating those things. And it could be a case of saying that, hey, we got this legacy thing over here that's going to run our core systems, but we're going to reduce what those core systems are down to something
Mm-hmm.
that's much more manageable for us for today. And this talks about what you were saying about earlier, Ellis, is like always be iterating, always try and move forward, and then try and
Mm-hmm.
think about, okay, how can I then start to utilize more of these composable solutions in order to try and stay ahead, test new
Mm-hmm.
markets, get new products out the door quicker,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately. And we've seen that rise. And we've recently done a study. We've done a few of these over the years, but most recently we published it a couple of months back. It had about 1,700 respondents to that across various different geos, and that was one of the things that came out of it. Was there was still this constant theme and this rise of WordPress being used in that space for those types of reasons ultimately.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously it has a lower entry cost, right? How
Hmm.
do you see that from your side?
Yeah.
This is all about cost ultimately, and we know licensing is a big thing of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I guess, kind of looking at that through the lens of like cost of ownership, where you're ultimately talking about time, right? Because time is valuable. There's a
Yeah,
classic phrase, time is money. Um, I was talking to a client the other day who they have a legacy system, and believe it or not, their marketing team, whenever they need to make an update, content update, they're working with Markdown. They're writing Markdown and then having to deploy it through Git. And it's painfully slow for them because one, they need their IT. The marketing team is dependent on the IT team to run these Git deployments, but also to help
yeah,
them with formatting Markdown correctly and then getting things back online. So what it boils down to is when they wanted to create or edit, like just say a simple page on their website, it was oftentimes a week and a half to 2 week long process when you factor in the communication and back and forth between different groups who all kind of have their role in making their legacy digital solution just functional on a basic level. And so for them, there's just this huge, it just felt like this huge lag and time waste because the marketing team would want to move very, very quickly, right? When they see a marketing opportunity, they want to jump on it. They don't want to
yeah.
have to wait, right? But then the IT team obviously has far more to worry about than just the public facing marketing website. They've got all kinds of other systems to administrate. And so, you can see how all of this just causes friction within an organization. And meanwhile, opportunities just sort of being lost and squandered. So I would say that the markdown example is a little extreme. That was kind of a first where I encountered that. But I see the same sort of scenario and effect play out time and time again. And so, I guess kind of shifting now to like, well, how do you improve these things? You look at things like WordPress and within that realm, you've got a lot of different optionality in terms of how you approach the build, right? I think on more of the kind of quick, fast iteration side, you have a lot of great page building applications out there, Elementor, Divi, Beaver Builder. I think those are some of the top ones, obviously, but there's several more. Um, and then you've also got, Gutenberg, the block editor that has been iterated on for, I think what is it, 4 or 5 years now, and it's advancing, month by month. That's a much more, I think, integral way to approach your build because you're building ultimately a design system that's a little more follows like best practice in terms of performance, development style, and so on. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can approach building a website in order to, make things more efficient.
Absolutely. I think when we look back at that study that we did, in terms of sort of just broad brush numbers, like most of the people were citing that, um, typically WordPress was coming in about 20% lower than proprietary systems like Sitecore and Umbraco,
Hmm.
um, and even up to 30% for the likes of Drupal. I think it does come down to a couple of things. Obviously, you've got the licensing fee in there. You talked about developer time and so forth. That WordPress has such a broad community of agencies and developers as a whole that you can get that project done quicker,
Hmm.
and you can call upon expertise much easier, and there's more flexible infrastructure options as well. And I think
Yeah.
those factors all come into that piece, ultimately.
Hmm.
And you mentioned it earlier, right? In terms of often what you do is trying to help people understand, okay, how do you get onto the right CMS? And you're on that part of the journey. But it's also about, okay, we need to help someone. They might be in a troubled situation in terms of like, hey, I am already on WordPress, but it's not working for me right now.
Hmm.
And it's not always about the code; it's about the infrastructure. And how do you help advise around that part of the conversation from a partner's
Yeah.
perspective?
I'm definitely of the mindset of, measure twice, cut once sort of thing,
Yeah,
right? Where better planning, a more integral approach to development is always going to yield better results. And while it might be feel a little bit more costly up front, it will absolutely be a cost savings long term, right?
yeah,
Because ultimately, when you take sloppy shortcuts and you use quick tools that help you go to market faster, but then come with things like performance issues and perhaps bugs, you just sort of it's the classic, like you take one step forward, two steps back. And so my approach to things is really to plan them just more authentically following best WordPress practices and then utilizing infrastructure like what WP Engine provides, where you've got essentially scalable resources. So you're not blocked into a specific number of CPUs, RAM, visitors, and so on, but instead your application can kind of ebb and flow with the demand of your organization and your audience. And that way you can ensure things like high availability, and you
Mhm.
can be online, when it matters most. So I think, to answer your question, like, how do I handle this with organizations? I try to kind of see where they're at mentally with these things. It's not, sometimes it takes a pretty considerable mindset shift to just look at things a little bit differently. So I like to honestly get to know them a little bit first, kind of see where they're at with things. And then we can start to find small iterative ways to improve their scenario. I think, going back to actually that open source topic a moment ago, that is another great attribute of open source, is it allows organizations to kind of test the water, so to speak, kind of start
Mhm.
to make small strides towards a future state, versus a license model where, if you think about it, you're going to make the yes or no decision that I'm going to get on board with this platform or not. And then the next thing that happens is you have to pay a very large sum of money in order to get access to it and start utilizing it, right? But if you're undergoing a large shift in your organization, WordPress, because it's free, there's a lot of additional free plugins within the community and ecosystem. It allows you to test the waters, ease into it slowly, and there's ultimately a lower barrier for entry that doesn't come with an exorbitant cost. So I think that that's really cool, and I think it provides a lot of organizations, especially at the enterprise, with flexibility at the end of the day.
And, when you think about hosting, whether that's something you're doing in-house, because you said it earlier, IT teams, they think about, they've got all these other systems they've got to manage. And sometimes
Hmm.
it's like the easier decision is to say, hey, we'll take this on board as well. We'll keep it within our farm. And it's a WordPress site, right? It's just this, it's not that complicated, whatever it may be, compared to, a big IT application.
Hmm.
Um, but you've got to have the three tenets of sort of performance, security, and scalability in mind. And as a marketer, you want to make sure you've got control of that ultimately, and you're sort of asking the right questions to the IT team, because there is a cost to you as a marketing team in terms of thinking about your growth. If your performance isn't where it needs to be, that's going to have an
Hmm.
impact on your SEO ultimately, or GEO in this new world. And security, right? Your IT teams may be keeping it under their umbrella of the IT things that they look at from a security standpoint, but is that actually best practice for WordPress, and is going in one direction going to impact your performance as well if it's not built with the two in mind? And then obviously scalability as well. You want those campaigns to be able to work seamlessly as and when they land, etc.
Yeah.
And so you have to think about that. And we actually had one customer. It was a global FMCG. They weren't self-hosting, but they won't go into the full sort of managed, with a specialist, a WordPress specialist. They're in the middle choosing an outsourced company to do it for them. And ultimately, they weren't getting those three things as high as they wanted to. The performance was being impacted, and the scalability was limiting, and it was costing them too much money. So coming back to the cost
Hmm.
piece, they were sitting going, actually, you either look at your upfront contract value in terms of what you pay for a managed host, or you tend to offset that with people, in some shape or form, whether it's people on your own staff or it is through
Hmm.
a managed organization. And if it's not the right one, there could be a cost to that as well. So we try and help people understand that, because ultimately, what we recognize through the research that we've done is that somewhere between 60 and 70% of digital infrastructure costs are invisible. When you think about the fees, the vulnerabilities that you may get wrong, the impact to your performance and what that means to your lead generation side of the business, the general maintenance and overhead costs that come with it as well. All those things will add to that cost of your digital footprint. And it's really something that needs to be understood in full ultimately. And we try and help businesses through that decision making process, ultimately.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things we're seeing, and I'd love to know how you're seeing it from your perspective as well, is when we think about AI, and the report that we saw, said that more people are looking for platforms that have AI automation, security optimization built into these platforms, and they're becoming a top priority. Is that
Hmm.
something that's echoed on your side too?
Yeah, actually, quite a bit. The topic of AI right now is coming up in in kind of two primary ways. I guess what I'll say is on the simpler side, air quotes, right? Um,
Yeah.
where I'll be asked by a lot of organizations, they'll say, we want to get AI into our public
Mhm.
facing, website applications. And what they ultimately are kind of alluding to is that they want a sort of like chat GPT, LLM chat type interface on their site where a user can interact with it, ask an open-ended question, or perhaps just dump a thought process in there and then get some real good, tailored feedback back from the LLM. So we've had that request a lot. We've got some cool things in the works for implementing things like that. But then on sort of, I guess, on the more complex side, organizations are starting to approach us about much more like agentic workflows, where we're talking about not necessarily just automation, kind of pushing data from point A to point B, but automation with essentially like decision making logic in between. And so that is definitely coming up more and more and more as time goes on. It's pretty cool. It's really exciting. It's a really exciting time to be experimenting with AI and WordPress and website applications.
For me, that's like an interesting sort of closing thought, because what you're talking about there is optimizing for growth, right?
Hmm.
And what you're not talking about there is spending time reacting to the day-to-day issues and things like that.
Right.
And I think that is a really good lens to be thinking about, the cost of your website. When you think about your team, this is if you're a marketer, for example, or an IT person, if you're spending too much time trying to react to the challenges you have today, and you're not really thinking about how you're optimizing for growth, if you haven't got those nimble, agile systems in place that allow you to even operate that way, that is a huge opportunity cost, ultimately.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good way to for people to start thinking about this topic, and analyzing where they are in their journey.
Yeah.
Um, so, Eric, yeah, this has been fantastic. I've enjoyed riffing with you, talking about this stuff. We could go
Yeah.
on for probably a good hour or so, but it was probably sensible to start bringing Erica back in now.
Sounds good. Yeah, it was a great chat.
Awesome. Thank you both. This has been fantastic. And thank you to everybody who has joined us today. We know you are very likely looking for more information on this subject. We have two QR codes here that really take WP Engine and AmericanEagle.com's looks at these. So take a look at the white papers that are linked. We'll make sure we drop those in chat before we roll. Otherwise, thank you, Ellis. Thank you, James. And thank you to everyone here. We really appreciate your time today. And please go to wpengine.com/events to check out what else we've got coming. Otherwise, we will share this recording with you out via email after the event. And have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.